Good morning. I was one of the ones who raised his hands having attended the 1991 Faith Doing Justice Conference. And it really was a phenomenal conference. I can remember the keynote speakers, Fred Kammer, who was present, Joe Doust, who was then provincial of the Detroit province, Frances Moore LePay, who was famous for her opus Diet for a Small Planet, and the general at the time, Father Kolvenbach, was present. And I can say I participated, but I can hardly say that my participation counted really as a commitment to social ministries. I was part of the host committee, and I was specifically in charge with planning an evening of recreation on a maritime vessel called the Boblo boat. And what we basically did was got everyone on a boat on the Detroit River. I was proud of bringing the sound of Motown to the event, I don't know if any of you remember Duke Fakir, one of the Temptations, but someone who did backup with the Temptations had a band that could provide music. But really the highlight of the Boblo boat was it sailed on the international waters because the Detroit River's neighbor to the south is the country of Canada. And we didn't know, this was soon after the Gulf War, we didn't know if there was going to be some massive civil disobedience, some action. So we said, if it happened, and it happened on the Boblo boat, we could always claim diplomatic immunity because it wasn't in the United States. So alas, the Faith Doing Justice Conference was very moving, but my first real experience of social ministries did come, as John said, when I was asked to work for JRS in northern Uganda, and this was with the Sudanese refugees fleeing the civil war in Sudan. This was right around the time of the Rwandan crisis, and so the notion of Eastern African refugees was first and foremost in everyone's mind and imagination. And JRS was brought to northern Uganda. Really, the UNHCR used them as an implementing partner to do educational effort, but they allowed a few priests to come in to provide sacramental ministry. And so that's what I did, camp to camp to camp, providing sacramental ministry. And I noticed that everywhere I went, while they were gracious to receive what I had to offer, there were so many financial requests, just nonstop, and then they came in the form of letters. And I remember visiting, after a few months, a Comboni missionary. And really, the Combonis are different than the Jesuits. The Jesuits go in response to a need and then leave. The Combonis go to bring the faith and then stay and to die and are buried with the people whom they bring the gospel to. And so the Comboni missionary asked me how I was enjoying my work with the Sudanese refugees. And he asked me if they were asking me for things. And I said, well, yes, they are. And he said, how is that for you? I said, well, it's very annoying. I said, because they ask and they ask and they ask and I can't give. And he kind of smiled and he said, oh, you are so American. You're only used to asking for that which you feel you have a 50 to 80% chance of getting. They know they're not going to get what they're asking you for, and yet they have the freedom to ask you. If they're that free to ask you, just think how free they are to ask God. And that stayed in my mind as a tremendous image of how I was taught, formed in my presbyteral ministry, was shaped by the Sudanese refugees. Attending that event, Faith Doing Justice, in 1991, it began with now the late Joe Hackla giving a litany of all those present in Detroit who really represented the society's commitment to social ministries. And it was this incredible feeling of being in the presence of these giants. Many have gone on to the Lord. And 22 years later, I suspect more than half of them have died, including Joe Hackla. But what's encouraging is that new giants are growing, new ministries are opening, and the tradition of social ministry that was so celebrated in 1991 continues to this day. And this morning we have the opportunity to hear of one of those new ministries, the Ignatian Spirituality Project, which really began what I would call in the crosshairs of providence between the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless wanting to come to the society to say, how can the society help with homelessness in Chicago? And the then provincial of the Chicago province saying, how can we bring the spiritual exercises to the marginalized? And a central figure in that conversation was Father Bill Creed, who is present and will speak today, and began a relationship, a very important relationship between the spiritual exercises and the homeless, not just in Chicago, but in many cities throughout the United States. And joined by Wayne Richard, who will also speak today, we can hear of the dynamic of the exercises, which are always growing and emerging, because while the exercises bring something to those who are homeless, they are also changed by the living witness and experience of those who make them, particularly those in the cities whom ISP serves. And so I'm certain that they will share their own stories, their own experience in their talk on friendship. But it's with great pride that we introduce this great new ministry continuing this tradition of social ministry, Father Bill Creed and Wayne Richard and the Ignatian Spirituality Project.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to just start by asking so everyone would just take a moment, center yourself, and let us be humble and open in the presence of God. This morning, myself and Bill to talk about our friendship open faith in the new frontiers we both were embarking on when we met each other. Bill and I are going to share several stories with some reflective comments about our journey together. I was staying in Depot shelter when I first encountered Bill, and a staff person suggested that I go on a ISP Ignatian retreat.
The retreat, by the way, I'm just aware because of this podium, there are about 3 or 4 tables that can't see Wayne, so Wayne, why don't you over here a little bit more, and I don't know, those of you who were in the blind part, if you want to, for the time being, the next 30 minutes, want to, there's a table way back there, perhaps, do whatever you'd like to do if you want to see. The retreat Wayne referred to was at the Villa Redeemer Retreat House, and I had picked up men at the Sacred Heart Shelter on the south side.
Well, I was at that cathedral shelter, and I came with someone else who was on the retreat team. At the time, I never heard of the Nation Retreat. I think I had never actually been on a retreat. The thing I remember the most was 2 statements from staff member at the shelter. One was that I would have my own bedroom. And that was appealing to me because at the time that I had been in the shelter, I had been used to live in dormitory style, and I had not been used to that at all. So the opportunity to have a bedroom of my own at that time was very appealing. But the other thing they said was that if you never heard the words of God, the retreat is the first, a good first step to begin to sort of simple stuff. And at that point, I was desperately seeking the face of God in my life. And so with those 2 impellings within me, I attended my first Ignatian Spirituality Retreat.
So after the retreat was over, and it's just a weekend retreat, Saturday, Sunday, it was decided by the team that instead of me bringing the people back to their shelter that I brought, that I would take the people back to Cathedral Shelter. And at the time I was driving a 1991 Chevy Caprice, a former cop car, beautiful car, it was old, but in good condition and big. And so it had 2 big front seats, big enough for me and Wayne, and we were both considerably larger then than we are now. So here are these 2 big guys next to one another, and I don't think we had talked to one another during the retreat, but we had our first personal conversation.
I think what a conversation it was. Bill asked me a lot about myself, where I came from, my history. And the thing that struck me the most, the retreat itself was unlike anything I think I had experienced. I went to the retreat and I was pretty certain that I did not want to share much. I just wanted to sort of see what it was about. And there was a gentleman there by the name of Steve who was giving a witness. And he, I was struck by him. He was a lot not like me and a lot also like me. He was white, he was professional. He had success, he was very smart. And he was sharing about his life as it had been derided by addiction. And he shared really deeply about the desperate and desolate state that he had found himself in, and how God had been present with him, and how he had been closer to God, and how it had begun to transform him. And I was riveted because I thought, well, here's someone who surely had it all from my perspective, and yet he was sharing from a place that I also found myself in present. It was, while I didn't share much, it was probably one of the most moving experiences for me at that time. And I was sort of fascinated by the entire retreat. And me and Bill rode back, and he was over in sharing a little bit about why he was doing the work of retreats.
So there we were in this Chevy Caprice driving home, and as I listened to this big guy sitting next to me, what I learned was here was someone who was quite articulate about his experience. I found out that while he was at Cathedral Shelter, he had started to write poetry, had kept a journal, and had a faith where only in God would he survive. And I was amazed and deeply moved and delighted to meet this guy, and I wanted to get to know him more. So as I dropped him off at the shelter on Sunday afternoon, I said, I'd like to stay in touch.
And I invited him to stay in touch. And a short time later, there was an opportunity to go to another retreat. And I remember as Bill came to the shelter and was talking about the retreat, and I ran up, I said, I'd like to be one of the first people to go to the retreat. And Bill said, well,
okay, I said, only if you're willing to tell your story the way Steve told his.
He did say that, and so I agreed to do that, and I wasn't quite sure what that would be like, what the experience would be like, what I really could share that would be helpful, but I was committed to serve, and I thought if God had brought me to this point, I could serve. And so I agreed to go upon the next retreat.
So this was our first encounter. I was just filled with a desire to get to know this guy much more. And it was clear to me that we both were trying to make the spiritual journey. We were both trying to be humane about it. And we both knew that without God, we were in serious trouble. That's our first story.
The second story, we were on a retreat in Northwest Indiana, and I had been on a team for several months at that time with Bill.
It was, I think, the year 2001, and my family was celebrating my mother's 88th birthday on Saturday night of the retreat, located 45 minutes from the retreat house where Wayne and I were leading a retreat for the homeless men in recovery. And by this time, Wayne and I had led several retreats at the very same site, run by these two little nuns that delighted in our coming. So I said to Wayne, I've got to leave at 4 p.m. I'll be back around 10:30 p.m. And Wayne got this look on his face.
pretty much like this look right now. Because I thought, well, here was Bill. I'd been with Bill, a man of God, and here I was just a man that God knew. And what was I going to do if the retreat had a moment where it needed the priest of the retreat? And so I was terrified. I pressed forth as best I could. It was a generous group of men who were on the retreat. And we made it, through the grace of God, through the evening successfully. I think they went to bed with consolation and peace.
So I returned about 10 p.m. and the evening part of the retreat had concluded, and Wayne was there on the porch outside waiting for me.
Anxiously. But I was well pleased that I was able to serve. And I shared with Bill that the evening had went well, that the retreatants had went to bed and in good spirits, and I was in good spirits as well.
So now we were a team of co-leaders. I had no doubt that the team would move forward in my absence and with Wayne's leadership. I knew that he would not only lead, but lead effectively the retreat. But that moment kind of shifted our relationship in some way. The men I knew not only found Wayne in his witness and his participation in the retreat very credible, but now Wayne knew he was a leader of these retreats. That's story number 2. Number 3, at one big point we began to travel outside of Chicago and went to Cincinnati to offer retreats. We did this often, and Wayne and I would leave around noon on the Friday and have Chinese food in Indianapolis for our supper, and then drive to Melbourne, Kentucky. This is the greater Cincinnati area, where women religious of the Congregation of Divine Providence had their mother house, but also welcomed retreats. In fact, this little tiny munchkin of a nun, Sister Lucy, when I had told her, we'd like to come and offer a retreat for homeless men who were in recovery, where a lot of retreat houses said, oh, sorry, can't do that, criminal, disease, bugs, etc. This nun said, you're just the kind of group we want to welcome for retreat. So the car trip was about 5.5, 6 hours. So Wayne and I had opportunity for chit-chat, but also for some heart-to-heart conversation on the way down, and then especially on the way back. And while I was on sabbatical just a couple of years before, I was in a bit of turmoil. Someone had suggested that I do some therapy, and someone suggested I write my own autobiography as part of a reflective exercise. And I shared that, how helpful that was for me with Wayne. And he had a lot of questions. So I shared some more of my story, my own struggles. I had fallen in love. I struggled with faith. At one point I had anxiety attacks, panic attacks, where I thought I was going to die. So we shared more deeply. And then I told him how writing my story was so freeing and centering, to kind of put down on paper in a very honest way these significant events, which I had shared with the spiritual director and others, but to see them all there at once. It helped me claim my life in new ways. And then Wayne began to ask more questions.
At the time, I had began work with the Coalition for the Homeless, and I was also very new in trying to recover myself. And I was very curious about how fully embracing one's story, taking a really honest, hard look at the journey of one's life could be so freeing. I began to myself look back. I was always very comfortable in moving my present feeling, but a little bit uncomfortable with in the past. I began to look back and write and attempt to write as Bill had modeled up an autobiography. I was taking a long, lingering look at myself, and I was brand new. I was brand new in the sense that I wasn't quite sure what to do with all those feelings in the present moment. But it was an experience, I think, that I never forget. What I found through it was there was not just enough for me to forgive, but I really had a need to be reconciled with my past in a way that gave me something to go forward. And so I began to make these little drafts of art. I had never wrote one before. Eventually I got it assembled, and I wanted to share it with Bill. I remember Bill used to speak often about peeling away the layers of this onion, and peeling it away and peeling it away. So I assembled my drafts into some form. I shared it with Bill, and Bill thought it was quite a great effort, first effort at it, and he encouraged me to share it with others. And so I shared it first with him, and ultimately it ended up being published in a periodical, the Jesuit Partners, I believe, magazine.
So here, Wayne and I wound up sharing our stories and then sharing more of our stories beyond ourselves. It strikes me when I reflect on this particular event of our sharing our stories more and more, how important it is for each of us to claim our own story. And there are always layers like an onion. So as we even tell these stories here this morning, you may find that a memory comes up from your own history. You may want to do an Ignatian remember and then relive that in your own imagination, that God may be waiting to say something to your mind and heart about who you are and whose you are, and how much I've learned nothing's ever wasted, how much all these crazy, sometimes painful memories are all part of our mission. But it's not only sharing our own stories for ourselves, writing them down, but it's connecting them with others. That I can't tell you how many people, when they read Wayne's story in the Jesuit Partners magazine, they got moved themselves, and they got interested in the Ignatian Spirituality Project because Wayne's story brought the project alive. And so often our stories bring our values and our vision, our faith alive. That's story number 3.
Story number 4. Bill called me up and said that his nun, Sister Victoria, had invited us to a retreat in the Virgin Islands with all his men. And so I never obviously been to the Virgin Islands, and it was in the middle of January, Chicago, being incredibly cold. Bill said, well, would you consider taking the time off to go? I thought, pause just enough. And I said, sure. And so we prepared to travel to the Caribbean in January that year.
So Wayne and I made plans to fly to the Virgin Islands, the first trip for the two of us to the Caribbean. And I should have realized that something was amiss when I received a fax from Sister Victoria the day before we were to fly. And this was her message. I asked her for 12 guys who were homeless. She says, I have 10 men, not the 12 you asked for, and they're not the apostles.
Well, we got there, and I was in the room, my first time ever being on the island, and it was very, very beautiful and very, very humble. And I was in the room, and I looked around, and I saw what I thought was a very huge animal dropping. And I said, said, good Lord, there's something that has access to this room, right? Now, pretty tough guy from Chicago, but I'd never been on an island and I wasn't quite prepared for that. So I got my bed into the center of the room and I gathered up all the sheets because I figured whatever this up, probably pretty agile, right? And I put them under the bed and I'm sitting there thinking, okay, my Lord, as I sat there, I thought I saw something out of the corner of my eye. When I looked, I didn't see anything. And I sat there again, I had the same experience and I thought I saw something. And when I looked and really opened my eyes, I realized that there was this lizard type of thing on the wall. It changed itself similar to the color of the cinder block, which was kind of a yellow color. And when my eyes got activated and I saw one, I saw the other 12. So I threw open the door, landed all falsity, and ran screaming down and ran down Bill's door. And I said, people, we gotta leave. This whole thing is overrun with these animals.
And this was before the Geico commercial. We knew what Geicos were. Well, we survived the night, and then the retreat began the next morning. And during the first spiritual exercise, where the guys, the 10 or 12, would normally be very focused. One guy got up and left, and then a second, and then a third retreat got up and left, and a fourth, and they'd return in 10 or 15 minutes, and this was most unusual. And then a fourth and a fifth did the same. It was like, Grand Central Station, up and down, and it's the first exercise. What is this? So when we finished, which was kind of an introductory, share yourself, etc., I turned to Wayne and I said, what do you think's going on?
And I had said, well, let me go and see if I can sort of find out. So I followed one of the guys outside of the place, and they were going around the back, and they were standing there and harvesting these kind of weeds. And I said, so what's going on? And they said, well, in certain parts, it grows naturally. What I thought they said was called the mama guana. And I said, well, what is that? They said, well, if you take some of this and you take too much, you'll wake up tomorrow. And I thought, what? And I realized that they were actually taking it. And so I went back and shared with Bill. I said, I don't think you need to free from mind or move alternate substances so they can be more available to God. It's exactly on the forefront of their mind right now. And so essentially, what we found out was that during that time, most, or if not all of the guys, were using in some capacity actually on the retreat. It was shocking the first time that happened.
Yeah, first time we've given over 100 retreats at this point, so, and by Saturday night, I was in a real funk, so they go to bed, or maybe they were knocked out from the drugs. So I go to chapel and I start pleading with God, and I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I'm wondering what's your will? What do we do? Should we send these guys home? Or should confront them? Say, look, we have a donor showed up from Sister Victoria. Got this guy to not only pay for our flights from Chicago round trip to St. Croix, but pay for the whole retreat, room and board. So I just was in a quandary, what to do. Struggling, and as the wee hours of the Sunday morning came in chapel, some clarity came, which is so typical of God in my life. It was, let go, let it be, trust me, and treat the men with dignity and respect. And so I let go of my resentment.
And I think because of that movement, we were able to turn a situation that could have been potentially this is a waste of time, but it's something that really, really touched. At the time, I was really remembering that oftentimes on retreats, even in the spirit world, the people are not always there for whatever reason. And so we seek to find an opportunity, right, to speak to the part of them that is listening, and there's always a part.
So that's story number 4. I have story number 5, which happened just a few months ago. Wayne was getting married on March 13th to Latanya, and he asked if I would invite me to the wedding, and then when I said yes, he asked if I would say something, and I said, you know, what's fitting? What would you like me to say? Can you give me some idea? And he says, I'll send you an email. This is what I got in an email. Madeline L'Engle, you know Madeline L'Engle, spiritual writer? I don't know how this guy finds this stuff, but you get the measure of a man. This is what he sent me, her quote. Still long, but it speaks. But ultimately, there comes a moment when a decision must be made. By the way, Latanya and Wayne have been dating for some time. Ultimately, two people who love each other must ask themselves how much they hope for as their love grows and deepens. How much risk are they willing to take? To make a vowed commitment is the biggest risk in human relations that a person can take. If we commit ourselves to one person for life, this is not, as many people think, a rejection of freedom. Rather, it demands the courage to move into all of the risks of freedom and the risk of love. Into that love, which is not a possession, but a participation. And when love is not a possession, but a participation, then it is part of that co-creation which is our human calling, and which implies such risk that it is often rejected in our culture. And it does take a lifetime to learn to love another. Well, just the fact that he would pick a quote like that at his wedding stunned me, but I wasn't surprised. It was a great privilege for me to be present there at the wedding. I was one of 2 white guys in an all African-American community of well over 100. Having the experience that Wayne often has, for example, in a moment like this. But it was a great privilege to speak from my heart to Wayne and Latanya on this special event during their wedding ceremony.
So story number 6, it was yesterday, less than 2 months ago, June 9th, it was Bill's 50th anniversary of the Jesuit, his 75th birthday, and the 15th anniversary of the Ignatian Spirituality Project for the homeless. And I was one of the 4 speakers, and they asked me would I come and say a few words about Bill. And as I was reflecting on who Bill has been in my life, and I realized that we live in a society that often judges us by what we have and how we look. And when me and Bill met, Bill had the courage and the compassion to move into a circle with a group of men like myself. That people didn't often, that I do, often do that. With an openness and an ear to hear, but also willing to share himself. And it was recognized through my walk with him, and I also think everyone who met Bill along with his ministry. And I shared those words during that celebration of Bill. Before I came there, I spoke with a man that Bill knows well. He was on some of the early retreats. His name was David Carter. Maybe some folks in this room who may have had some experience with David. But David had a really simple and often edgy way of speaking, right? And he said, you know, Bill, right, he's got the guts. And David never really gave much explanation when he said something. You either got it or you missed it all in the delivery, right? But I recognize, Bill shared with me through his friendship the courage for me to help me accept myself through his acceptance, through his willingness to hear openly and deeply the stories that I would share. And it'd be his trust in my goodness also allowed me to trust in my own goodness and to see God in that. And I shared that at Bill's celebration. Bill is, and has been from the beginning, a great friend and companion in my journey.
We met at a Chinese restaurant in Chinatown in Chicago to prepare this talk, and we started reminiscing and telling stories, and we could be here for another 3 hours, and we finally settled on these 6 stories. Perhaps something we've shared has triggered one of your stories. As I said earlier, you may find it helpful to reflect on what came up as we shared our stories, because generally, stories of another person speak our life to ourselves. And our life stories are really one way in which God writes God's scripture, very personal. And as we said earlier, nothing's ever wasted. So, listen to the desire of your heart in this reflective time.
I think I just, in sort of closing, invite you to remember that we all have a piece of each other's puzzles. The gift, I think, of the relationship that me and Bill had formed and had is that I was able to offer him a piece, and he was able to offer me a piece. So I encourage you, as we go forward here, to begin to think about the pieces that you have that belong to another. Share. Thank you.
Control someone else who's down, who's vulnerable. So I appreciate the question and the comment. We have to be extremely vigilant about boundaries in all of our ministry. And neither on the one hand, dominant, taking control and manipulating others, which takes away their freedom, or on the other, sometimes out of compassion, we can merge with them, and then we're in a pit. So that's where, who ministers to the minister? Every minister needs to be aware of this issue, every minister. So that's my first reflection on this. Well, I don't know if you have anything to say about this.
I think I agree with all of what you said, Bill. I also think that I was sharing at my table tomorrow that we have to really understand about being in right relationship with each other. And I think that, when we talk about the concept of friend, there are descriptors of a friendship. it is contained by boundaries of mutual respect, right? Freedom, an offering and a give and take, and also what it looks like to either abuse or take advantage of that friendship. And I think many of those values we have to uphold as we particularly look forward to working with ministry and how we work with each other, and particularly people who are marginalized in our communities.
Another aspect of this comes to mind. At my table, we talked about the difference between service and solidarity. And one of the big problems we have is service is often top-down. I give, and we can be very comfortable with that. It can also be, I'm in control. Whereas solidarity is more a level of union. We're on the same plane. And when we talk about friendship, it strikes me that, no friendship happens like that. Friendship usually happens, you ever go to a picnic where you play a game where you throw the balloon full of water? Or sometimes you just throw eggs, you line 2 rows up, everybody gets a balloon, one side gets a balloon full of water, one side gets that egg, and then you toss it to your partner, and then your partner, everybody takes a step back, and then they throw the egg or the balloon a little further, and then they take the next step back. So you're throwing the balloon with water or the egg greater and greater distances, and learning how to throw and learning how to catch. Some people can't catch it, and they get all wet, or they get all caught with eggs because it breaks. In other words, you have to learn how to throw back and forth. Trust has to grow. And it strikes me, that's what friendship really is. It's this mutual back and forth, which is very free. When all is said and done, there's no manipulation going on in friendship. If there is, somebody's going to get out of that if they're centered. And there's no merging, because if it is, it's not a fun friendship. So I think solidarity is important. Whereas so often when we serve, we're doing for people. We're doing something for them. So I think that's another nuance here regarding friendship. We need to give it time and test it out, and it has to be mutual. I mean, there have been times we didn't talk about these stories because we decided to talk about the stories that we were comfortable with. But we've had some tough times,
Hi, my name is Dick Curl. I'm doing Hispanic ministry in Kansas City. One thing that struck me about you guys, Wayne and Bill, was that I guess when you started your relationship, Bill, you were in charge of the group, and then Wayne, you were a homeless person, right? So Bill, you're on top, Wayne, you're on the bottom, but now you guys are on the same level. For a friendship, which really strikes me and impresses me. What advice would you give to us so we could? When can you do that? When can't you do that? I guess might be my question. I doubt that Wayne or Bill that you could do that with everybody that you work with and for. But what's the difference?
What do you mean the same level?
I was trying to help Bill out.
I'm reminded that we're on the same level day after day when we go together. When we're up here, you see the good.
Well, I think it sort of starts with the recognition of what the similarities are. I think, and again, it's understanding where we can share something with each other. I think that's where both the mutual respect, but also the mutual journey sort of goes forward. I said earlier in the talk that a lot of how we see ourselves on our side of the world is really defined by what we look like and how we have. But there's so much of a deeper, there's so much more of a deeper level to us, and so much more of what we are. Bill, one of the things I realized about Bill, and I referenced that earlier, is that the early retreats were people really talking about really where they are. It was not sort of shaded in a certain way. It was a tough group of guys who had a tough experience with life, and we were in some tough places. And I think it takes a certain amount of wanting to share your willingness to be in solidarity. We'll use it in solidarity, which means your ability to stand in place with. And it's not always an easy thing to do. When you're on the other side, as I was, you recognize that it takes a certain amount of giving that isn't something material of yourself to just stand there, even to stand in witness of the struggles that someone may have, of the desolate place that they may be in. I think all of us probably recognize the moment where we may have been faced with something that scared us tremendously and wanted to run and couldn't, and maybe turned and saw others that we thought were with us because they could take off. So I think that the first place we learn, one, to sort of create a right way of looking at each other is to understand what that means to be in solidarity and support with each other. The earlier retreats, I remember, there was a certain amount from the guys from the group of respect that there were Bill and people who would even give a weekend to stay in that place. Those stories, those things that we talked about were familiar to us over our life. And probably a lot of us at that time, if we could have been somewhere else, we would have. So for someone who didn't have to be there, we recognized there was a certain reverence and respect of that commitment to be in a relationship. That I think was one of the founding energies to allow those retreats to go on. I think even those relationships to build. And I just want to say this, after my first retreat, one of the things I recognized, there was a group of probably 18 men in the program that I was in at that time. A couple of them went on retreat at the shelter, and a couple of them went on retreat. Those men we became brothers in a way that we had not while we were at the shelter, in entirely different ways, which was really the impetus and the energy for me to continue finding circles of mutual respect and understanding. Because I realized that was going to be the catalyst that began to change my world and began to change the world at large.
6 hours when you're driving in a car through Ohio. No offense. And I'm just, what came to mind for me, and this is a challenge for me, and this is more of a comment, but I would be interested to hear any other reflections you have on it, is just the need to create that space for that conversation to happen. And how often I give into the tendency to just, you gotta be doing. You have to keep doing. Part of that is my cultural baggage, part of that is my Jesuit baggage, part of that is whatever it is. But the need to fight that, to create that empty space of just being together, of just hanging out and letting whatever happens, letting that conversation just emerge, and just how important it seems that is. Or the other image that you used was being at the Chinese restaurant. Even there, you were doing work, you were putting this talk together, but it was also a chance to reminisce. It was a chance of sharing a story. So just a comment, if you have other comments with that.
I would echo that, Brian. In fact, it was over a year ago. Wayne and I hadn't seen one another, and I get this, I think it was a phone call, maybe it was an email, a phone call. Hey Bill, I haven't seen you in a while. How about lunch at Bloom Palace? My treat. Chinese restaurant. Remember that? So I guess that's where friendship is. It's mutual.
may start a relationship and really feel a connection, and that because of the nature of the homeless population, if cell phone is turned off, you can't communicate, you can't kind of follow up. There isn't really a good answer to it, but what do you do? What do you tell me? I mean, I'm sure that happens for you.
Happens often. Steve, who Wayne mentioned, we mentioned in one of our stories, someone I was very, very close to, and was with him through hell, and over a long, long time. He's now married with a child, has a wonderful job, he's bright to begin with, and capable. He didn't want to have anything to do with that terrible past of his, including me. Well, you might go.
For growth, I think, in the relationship as well, and it changes, But we also have to recognize and be comfortable with that change. I think many times people move into a different arena, a segment of their life, a different stage of their life. And we often have to ask ourselves when we're friends with people, what's that friendship look like when it changes? What's it look like when it changes? But I do some organizing as part of my main job in Chicago. I try to remember some of the new folks who come in as organizers, and I always invite them that there is, once you get to know someone, you get to know what they like to do, books, shows, coffee houses, hangouts, And I always tell people, part of maintaining relationships is not always invite them over your house, but to go where they are too. So you have to sort of get out. If people live on the street and it is their home, but when you go to their home, you're going to the streets, you have to recognize that. And be comfortable with that too.
This is to both of you as well. I guess maybe two movements, not to oversimplify the movements of your relationship, but moving from encounter to friendship, that I'm seeing kind of one movement there, and call on all of us in our ministries and our parishes. But also the move then from friendship to, I guess what I wrote down as I'm thinking of in terms of the social vision, or the transformative social vision of friendships like this, is the movement from friendship to friendship with a purpose. That yes, friendship, but then something, a fruit, a grace came from the friendship here. You're working together, speaking like this, the rapport you have together. So I wonder, when did it feel like there was a sense of, wow, in our friendship, there's something that has a gift in speaking like this to other groups, doing the retreats together, bringing other people into that spirit. And one tension is you can't really there's no way to quickly bypass the friendship to try to get to the friendship with a purpose. So it's the grace of the time that it takes to build that. I don't know if you had a sense of when it felt like the friendship was moving to a friendship with a purpose, like we have a mission together. That's a real gift and grace.
I think it happened, you're right, it didn't move swiftly. Part of what happened in our long drive together is we had the opportunity to ask each other some really tough questions. I think I had certainly some tough questions about Bill, about why he would want to leave sort of this world that he was successful, professional, and was comfortable, and it was all of these things, and emerge himself in sort of this different place. And I genuinely wanted to know, because what's inherent in those relationships, to be able to see that common vision, is also this trust that happens in a relationship. That doesn't happen easily. But it is through that mutual trust, I think, that we are empowered and grace happens. So it happened over time. One of the things I realized he was really rooted in as a minister, I think, was the freedom that people could have, right, through the grace of God. And I think what my journey had been, and what I recognize around others who've been in the journey with me, is the need for that freedom through God to be very, very present. We wanted no illusion that it would be a long time in this world before we got to what we call equality, right? Of true social justice, right? But the freedom, right, that you can have every day, the peace that you can have every day, and the commitment to see that happen in people is where we share sort of a common vision. When I became really aware that Bill had his reasons for wanting to see that quote-unquote kingdom come in line with mine, and I think we transitioned to a different relationship and work together with that.
My only comment is that it's ongoing, and I think like in any relationship, the issue is intimacy. And I have my point of view based on my experiences, my values, my beliefs, my attitudes and values. The other person has his or her experience with their point of view, their perspectives, their values, attitudes, beliefs. The question strikes me always in friendship and in any kind of intimacy is, can I not discard my own point of view, but can I set it aside enough so I can enter into the other's point of view, the other's perspective, and see things from their perspective, from their values, their point of view. That's what solidarity does, that service doesn't do, in my judgment. And solidarity means we're going to be friends in the Lord. So it has to do with this capacity to shift my attention. Lonergan tells us, I'm going to be late for Mass, those of you who go to Mass. Lonergan tells the story of three people go into the forest, and they go to the same tree. One's a carpenter, one's an artist, and one's a botanist. They see the same tree, but because of their attention, because of their point of view, what they see in that tree as a carpenter is totally different from what the botanist sees or what the artist sees. And his point is that we always have our own intentionality. We always have our own point of view. The question for, if you will, that's what the Pope was saying, I think, about the refugees, the indifference issue that we had at prayer this morning is, will I have the openness to begin to shift my perspective, my point of view? To begin to say, what's it like? And conversations lead us to do that. Service so often, we dole food out to the homeless. It's only when we enter into conversation with them that we begin to realize here's a human being, and then I have the possibility of my point of view shifting.